Night had only just settled when the line of military lorries rolled to a stop on a dirt track, soaked with recent rain. For a moment, the engines idled in the darkness like beasts reluctant to rest. Inside the trucks sat dozens of German women telephone operators, typists, auxiliary gunners huddled together for warmth. Their faces were drawn and pale, their uniforms smeared with dust gathered from days of desperate retreat across a collapsing front. One by one, they climbed down stiffly, boots slipping slightly on the wet ground. Their breath drifted into the cold air as faint clouds. None of them spoke. The exhaustion had pushed past words. Fear had swallowed whatever remained. British soldiers stood waiting nearby, spaced evenly, rifles slung across their chests. Their eyes were sharp, their posture controlled. They carried themselves with the calm efficiency of men who had seen too much and learned to show little. The German women knew exactly what they expected next. For months, their officers had painted a terrifying picture of enemy captivity, rough treatment, humiliation, punishment delivered the moment they surrendered. The women had braced themselves for that fate. In their minds, this moment standing in the dark in front of British guards was the first step into a nightmare they had been warned about. But the night took a turn they could never have imagined. The intake process began without theatrics or raised voices. A veteran British sergeant major walked down the line of captured women, clipboard in hand, checking their names against identity discs and small personal documents. His face was stern but not hostile. His tone remained steady and procedural, and then, as he paused in front of a frail young woman near the end of the line, a whisper drifted into the cold air so soft it nearly disappeared. "We haven't eaten for a week." The words didn't sound like a complaint. They didn't even sound like a plea. They were simply the final truth of someone whose strength had run out. The sergeant major froze. His pen hovered over the paper. A couple of British guards exchanged startled glances. They had all seen hunger during the war among refugees, civilians, even captured soldiers, but there was something different in the woman's tone, something that pierced straight through the rigid formality of military procedure. It was the sound of someone on the brink of collapse. Before the sergeant major could respond, a young corporal suddenly broke formation and ran toward the cluster of buildings at the edge of the camp. His footsteps splashed through the muddy ground as he raced toward the cookhouse. The German women looked at each other anxiously, trying to interpret the sudden movement. They had no frame of reference for what was happening. Nothing fit the terrifying picture they had been taught. Only confusion remained. The year was 1945, and the German lines had disintegrated so quickly that auxiliary units like these women had been swept up in the chaos. For 7 straight days, they had been moved from one temporary holding point to the next with nearly no food or shelter. They had slept sitting upright, wrapped in their thin coats. Hunger had settled into their bones like an illness. When the lorry ramp dropped, the scene outside, armed soldiers, floodlights, shadows matched the ominous descriptions their commanders had warned them about. But the behavior did not. A Scottish corporal approached and, without raising his voice, simply said, "You'll be under guard now. Follow me." The absence of threats unsettled them almost as much as threats would have. The women were led into a long wooden hut that served as the intake hall for this temporary transit camp. Lamps flickered overhead, casting uneven patches of light across the planked floor. The air smelled faintly of damp wood and engine oil. Inside, the processing continued. The sergeant major checked identification, asked brief questions, and marked each prisoner's arrival. The tone remained formal, but never cruel. Then came the second time he heard it, the same frail woman, unable to stand fully upright, swaying slightly as she leaned forward. "Please. No food for days." This time the sergeant major didn't hesitate. He spoke quietly to the nearest private. "Go. Tell the cooks now." The mess staff had already begun preparing the evening meal for the British guards. Massive metal pots simmered over roaring stoves. The air inside was thick with heat and the smell of broth. The door burst open, and the breathless private relayed what he had heard. The head cook, a broad-shouldered man with a worn apron and a voice that usually carried effortlessly through the building, didn't even ask for details. He didn't need to. Load up the trays. They're eating first. Within minutes, the cooks assembled whatever hot, nourishing food they could gather on short notice. Generous slices of fresh bread slathered with butter, steaming vegetable broth enriched with beef stock, boiled root vegetables still hot from the pot, thick mugs of tea sweetened enough to revive the faintest spirit. It wasn't elaborate, but it was warmth. It was fuel. It was survival. And for women who had lived on nothing but scraps and fear for a week, it was salvation. When the German women were brought into the mess hall, They stopped as if turned to stone. Warm air flooded over them, carrying with it the smell of real, substantial food. The metallic clinking of ladles and bowls rang like music. Tears spilled instantly quiet. Unrestrained, the cook stepped forward and offered the first tray to the woman who had spoken up. Her hands shook violently as she took it. For a moment she didn't eat. She just stared, as though afraid the meal would disappear if she blinked. In hesitant English, she whispered, "This is for us." The cook nodded softly, "Every bit of it. No one will take it away." What followed left an unforgettable mark on everyone watching. These starving women didn't attack the food. They didn't devour it recklessly. They sat down at the table, straightening their backs as best they could, and ate slowly, carefully, with quiet dignity. Each mouthful seemed both relief and pain, a reminder of how close they had come to breaking. For the first time in days, heat spread through their bodies. Their faces regained faint traces of color. Their breathing steadied. After the meal, British medics examined them and confirmed what was already clear: severe hunger, dehydration, and cold exposure. The German women braced for reprimands or mockery. Instead, they received thick army blankets, clean bedding, and the steady warmth of a field stove glowing red in their temporary barracks. A British nursing auxiliary later recalled, "At that moment, they weren't our enemy. They were just young women who needed help." In the days that followed, the women were assigned routines, roll calls, basic duties, written regulations, but none of those details stayed with them. What stayed was that night. Years later, when they were interviewed for post-war historical projects, the memories surfaced again and again. Always the same scene, always the same words, and the British guards who were there never forgot either. That night became a small, shining moment in the middle of a brutal war, a reminder that humanity can appear even in places where it seems impossible, all because of a single, trembling admission: "We haven't eaten." If stories like this remind you how powerful simple kindness can be, even in the darkest chapters of history, then don't leave without joining us. Subscribe now and follow our journey as we uncover more true, forgotten accounts of World War II. Stories that show that even when nations fall apart, humanity doesn't have to.